This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is something quieter than that and much more dangerous. Because what you're watching is not a disagreement. It's a system losing its ability to stay coherent. A governing machine where policy is no longer built. It's improvised, announced like a thought, revised like a mood, and enforced like a loyalty test. And when that happens, the risk isn't just political embarrassment. The risk is that one impulsive sentence becomes a market shock. One performative threat becomes a real conflict. And the people inside the room start planning their exits instead of managing the damage. So if you want to understand what's actually breaking right now, stay with me. Because the next piece is the part everyone keeps missing. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. What truly controls the system now isn't ideology. It isn't strategy. It isn't even policy. It's leverage, attention, and fear. Because in a normal administration, power flows through institutions, briefings, agencies, process, the slow, boring machinery that stops a country from lurching into disaster. But in this one, power flows through proximity. Who's in the room? Who gets the call? Who gets praised? Who gets punished? And that changes everything. It means decisions aren't made by the people tasked with knowing the consequences. They're made by whoever can survive the consequences or dump them on someone else. So when you hear internal conflict described like a rift or a disagreement, understand what it really is. It's a warning light on the dashboard of a party that can't coordinate itself anymore. Not because it lacks votes, because it lacks control. And once control breaks, the next shift happens silently. For a long time, Republicans told you this era was about strength, about discipline, about order. But what actually changed slowly, quietly, was something else. Before, the party had a chain of command. It had factions, sure, but it also had gravity, a center of mass, something that could absorb pressure without snapping. Now it doesn't. Now, every major decision becomes a performance, a test, not of competence, of loyalty, and that is the silent shift. Because loyalty isn't policy. Loyalty doesn't stabilize oil markets. Loyalty doesn't reassure allies. Loyalty doesn't keep interest rates calm. Loyalty doesn't stop a war. It just decides who gets blamed when the system breaks. And that's why the most dangerous change is the one that feels normal. The slow conversion of government into a stage where even restraint looks like betrayal. And even caution looks like weakness. And once that becomes the rule, the first real shock is never the last. Then came the moment where the mask slipped. A president stood in front of cameras and said casually that Iran had called to negotiate. A meeting was being set up. But he added, asterisk, we may have to act before the meeting. Asterisk, that's not a plan. That's a spark near gasoline. Because you can't announce diplomacy and threaten a strike in the same breath without detonating uncertainty. Inside the markets, inside the Pentagon, inside the White House itself. And notice what wasn't there. No details, no clear objective, no explanation of what act even means. Just a vague threat delivered like an offhand comment. And that's the symptom, not the story. The story is what happens when foreign policy becomes improvisation, when escalation becomes a reflex, when the people who understand the blast radius have to react in real time. So yes, if you want the next part of this breakdown, subscribe and stay with me. Because the next question is the one nobody wants to ask. Who exactly is forced to carry the consequences? Here's the mechanism. And it's brutal in its simplicity. Trump can generate crisis with a sentence, but he doesn't absorb the cost. Other people do. The cost gets pushed outward to markets that hate uncertainty, to allies who need predictability, to voters who feel price spikes before they feel rhetoric, and to the people inside the administration whose job is to make chaos look like governance. That's why this isn't really about whether a strike happens. It's about who benefits from the posture, because the reward is immediate. You look tough. You dominate the news cycle. You force everyone else to react. But the damage is delayed, and delayed damage is politically useful because it creates a scapegoat window. That's where J.D. Vance enters the story. He built his identity on no new wars, on restraint, on being the anti-intervention future of the party. And now the system is demanding something else from him. Not judgment, not strategy, obedience. And when obedience is the price of survival, the next crisis doesn't come from Iran. It comes from inside the room. So the pace changes and the room gets colder. Because the leaks start, not speeches, not press conferences, not open rebellion, leaks. Anonymous officials, strategic quotes, carefully placed stories that frame one person as reckless and another as responsible. Trump leaning towards strikes, Vance urging diplomacy. That framing isn't an accident. It's insulation. And Trump knows exactly what insulation means. It means someone is planning for after, someone is building a paper trail, someone is preparing to say, asterisk, I tried to stop it, asterisk. In Trump's world, that is unforgivable because loyalty isn't just support. It's submission. It's going down with the ship smiling. And once Trump senses a future candidate standing next to him, acting like a separate political actor, the system reacts the only way it knows how. It isolates. It sidelines. It starves you of oxygen. First, silence. Then marginalization. Then blame. And that's the cliff you should be watching. Because the next move is where the human cost becomes unavoidable. And this is where it stops being abstract. Because this isn't just about factions inside a party. This is about what happens to you when a government starts running on impulse. You feel it first in the prices. Gas, groceries, rent, the quiet inflation that doesn't care what anyone promised on a campaign stage. You feel it in the instability. The way markets flinch when policy sounds like improvisation. The way employers freeze hiring when they can't predict what comes next. And you feel it in the exhaustion because you're asked to live inside a permanent emergency. 1 week it's tariffs. The next week it's the Federal Reserve. Then it's war language, threats, strikes, act before the meeting. And here's the part that matters. You don't get a vote on the mood swings, but you pay for them anyway. So if you've ever wondered why political chaos turns into personal stress so fast, this is why. If you want the next layer of this, subscribe. Stay close. Because now the ripple moves outward. This is no longer local. It never was. Because when the United States signals volatility, the world doesn't wait for clarification. It reacts. Allies don't hear strength. They hear unpredictability. They hear risk. Markets don't hear tough talk. They hear instability in shipping lanes. They hear oil shock. They hear the possibility of escalation that no one can price correctly. And adversaries don't hear a coherent strategy. They hear opportunity. That's the global ripple. A single vague threat can harden positions overseas. A single improvised announcement can spook investors everywhere. A single internal leak can signal that the chain of command is fractured. And fractured command is dangerous in any country. But in the country with the world's reserve currency, the largest military, and the biggest leverage over global trade, it's combustible. Because the world is built on one assumption, that American decisions, whether you like them or not, will be legible. When they stop being legible, everyone starts hedging, and hedging becomes a kind of silent panic. Which brings us to the future, not a prediction. A menu